We are following breaking news. Martin Luther King Jr.'s youngest son, Dexter Scott King, has died at the age of 62. The King Center in Atlanta says he died at his home in California today following a battle with prostate cancer. Like his father, Dexter Scott King served as an American civil rights activist. He was committed to protecting Martin Luther King Jr.'s intellectual property and otherwise preserving his legacy. He died just 1 week after the nation marked Martin Luther King Day. Ernie Suggs joins us now. He is a reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Ernie, I understand that you knew Dexter Scott King. Talk to us about how you will remember him.
Yeah, I mean, I remember him. I thank you for having me on, first of all. Yeah, I know him very well. I've covered the King family since I moved to Atlanta in 1997 to work at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And, you know, I always found him as a very intelligent, smart, caring person who diligently protected his family's name, protected his family's image. He got a lot of criticism for that, but you know, he was the gatekeeper to make sure that his family's image, and his father particularly, and his mother, that their image was protected and that their image was carried forth his legacy. So after his mother passed, particularly after his mother passed, he was the guy, he was the kind of that gatekeeper for the King legacy, keeping that King legacy alive.
So we spoke with Martin Luther King III last week. We had him here on Martin Luther King Day. Talk to us about the different roles that the children had and the relationship between the King children.
Well, I mean, if you look at the roles, Dexter, you know, there's two tracks. There's the intellectual property track and there's a nonprofit track. Bernice King, who's the youngest daughter, the youngest child, is the CEO of the King Center, which is the nonprofit, which, you know, puts on King's Day, has events, gives out grants, receives grants. But Dexter was in charge of the what's called the King Estate, which is the intellectual property. So in terms of, you know, Dr. King's image, his voice, his books, all of that was directed by Dexter. And at times there could be conflict. You know, every family has conflict, and the King family is not an exception to that. So there was often conflict about what direction that they were going to go. What were they going to do? There was one of the last things we wrote about Dexter was a couple of years ago when he thought about selling Dr. King's traveling Bible. And there was a lot of controversy about that within the family. So, you know, that's kind of like, you know, the way they both went. But he controlled, you know, like I said, the profitable part, and Bernice controlled the non-profitable.
I mean, it's such a legendary figure. There is so much to preserve, protect, and there's so much also to maintain. And I'm sure that requires thinking financially how to maintain the legacy of Dr. King alive. And as you said, I mean, decisions and ideas might be very different given the different mindsets of the different family members. But it must have been a great deal of pressure that he dealt with. Talk to us about maybe some of those conflicts that Dexter Scott King faced in maintaining that legacy.
It was a great deal of conflict because you think about it. This guy's father was murdered, right? His mother died in 2006. His sister died in 2007. If you look at him as a regular person, you know, wouldn't you want to preserve your family's image? Do you want anyone else making money off of your family? And that's what he was trying to do. He didn't want people making money, you know, and this was the controversial part of it. He didn't want people making money off of his father's books and words and legacy and likeness. He wanted to make that money. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. My mother passed away a couple of years ago. I don't want anyone else making money off of her name or image. So I think that that's what he tried to do. That's not anything different than what the Kennedys are doing or what the Forbeses are doing or what any other prominent family is doing. He was protecting his family's image. But because he was doing it and the way he was doing it, and, you know, frankly, you know, because he was a king, you know, he gets criticized for that. But I think if you really, really look at it, he was doing what was in the best interest of him, his family, and his parents.
And I mean, sometimes, as you mentioned, it's people will use the likeness of a legend to make money. And sometimes that means, you know, films, books, television shows. Were there any particular fights, if you will, that he held up that are memorable, and how do you think he'll be remembered best?
I mean, I think he'll be remembered, you know, as, you know, obviously he's the son of a great American, you know, Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King. But I do think that, you know, as time passes, I think right now people are going to probably remember him as being, and this is not fair, but as being too protective of the name, being too protective of King's image. But I think over time, what people will start to see, you know, how this image, how Dr. King, he's, you know, you got to understand that the King Center was founded in 1969, a year after Dr. King was killed. So that was put in place specifically to carry forth the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. What Dexter King did and what Bernice King are doing is continuing that legacy. And that's always very complicated. It's complicated how you do it. It's complicated, you know, the methods you use. You know, you're going to make a lot of enemies. You're going to make a lot of friends. And, you know, and I think, you know, I think he suffered from that. You know, he didn't live in Atlanta full time. He got married 11 years ago and moved to Malibu, California. A lot of people that haven't seen him in 11 years. So, you know, even the fact that he passed away today of prostate cancer, which is a very devastating disease that impacts Black men, particularly disproportionately, a lot of people didn't know because his family is so private and this is a private matter. So I think that, you know, he suffered a lot, I think, in how he dealt with things and how he dealt with business. And I think that that's in it. Again, I think that's a tragedy.
Ernie Suggs, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.